and welcome. I'm Rituparna, and you're listening to the Storied Way Perspective, a podcast that journeys into the lives of thought leaders and change makers who use stories to shape the way we learn, grow, and connect with the world. My guest today is someone whose life itself is woven through stories told, lived, performed, and felt. Valentina Trivedi is a writer, educator, performative storyteller, TEDx speaker, and one of the voices behind Aao Suno Kahani, a delightful podcast and YouTube channel where stories come alive with depth, humor, and heart. From scripting films to directing a biopic on yoga guru BKS Iyengar, from performing Dastangoi to adapting Satyajit Ray's Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne for children, how much I love that show. Her storytelling journey is as versatile as it is. What makes Valentina's voice especially powerful is the lens through which she sees the world, that of a childist. She believes in approaching learning and life itself from the child's point of view. As someone who works deeply with parents and educators, her perspective on storytelling is not just performative or pedagogical, but profoundly personal. I've known Valentina for a little over a decade now, and I love her stories as much as I admire her as a storyteller in our world. In this conversation, I look forward to speaking to Valentina about her discoveries along the storied way, her journey as a storied believer, a performing artist, writer, parent, and educator. So, whether you're a storyteller or an educator or a parent or someone who's trying to find their way into the storied world, I would invite you to lean in and listen to this conversation. Let's begin. Hi, Valentina. Welcome to the Storied Way Perspective.
Thank you for having me here, and it's a pleasure to meet you. And you said 10 years. Has it just been 10 years that we've known each other? It seems
Yes, a
like
little over 10. A little over 10. I said that. A little over
yeah, it seems
10.
like a longer, much longer time. But I think that's
Yes.
the thing with storytellers. I mean, you sort of feel so deeply connected. Uh, yeah, that's the beauty of stories.
I was just telling her before I started recording that I met her a little over 10 years back at a storytelling festival. It was my first, and I think it was her 10th, 15th, 20th, or something like that. Her outing at a big festival with lots of children. And of course, she came out because I think she heard my voice. She came out, she stood under a tree. And then, with very shaking hands, I went and shook hands with her and I introduced myself, said, I am so and so. And then I've had the privilege of traveling with her to many other festivals and telling along her side. And I know how beautifully she warms up to children. I remember one particular festival, Valentina. This was in Kohima. And there was this one child that day on the second day, perhaps it was the last session of the first day or the last second day. And the footfall had sort of dried out. And there was one child who had heard you in the school or she had heard you in an earlier session and she came back with her parents saying, I want to listen to a story. We thought the session would be cancelled because there weren't enough people. But I remember Valentina sitting under a tent with that one child and her parent sitting and telling stories. You remember that?
I remember there was a child who came with her parents, but okay, she was the only one.
She was only one. Under that, I have a picture for it. I have a picture for it. You sat with that one child and her family, and you were telling her a story with full gusto, as if you have an audience of 100 in front of you.
I think it's a special privilege to be able to tell a story to a child. And I think any adult who's had that experience, whether it be hundreds of children or just one child, is really privileged. I'm getting goosebumps as I'm saying it because having a child's attention and telling a child a story is something close to being close to God. It is a very spiritual and a very uplifting and very fulfilling and calming experience. So, yes, yeah, I am sure I would have loved it even if it
Yes, you
was
did. You did. And we were all in awe of this whole magical experience when a child comes seeking a story. I mean, children love stories. We know that. There are children who go through their entire lifetime without having an adult tell them a story. It's a great privilege for an adult to hold a child's attention, like you say. But you're somebody who tells stories to children and adults and mixed audiences. What is so special about telling stories to a child? How does it compare?
So, Ritu, I think what I realized as I kept growing older, I realized the value of my childhood. So, I remember that as a child, I was always, anything I said was never ridiculed. I was always listened to. And I used to be very fond of storybooks, and I read both in Hindi, my mother tongue, and in English. And anybody who asked me, what would you like me to get for you? And the answer was always Kahani ki kitab. And I used to love reading books, and I used to love listening to stories. And I must say this, I was very fortunate to have adults in my environment who encouraged this, who would bring me storybooks, who would tell me stories. And I remember once in a while we would have a visitor at home, and I would just go up and I'd say, Kahani sunaiye. And if the person said, you know how adults sometimes do, oh, I don't remember a story, I can't think of one, I don't know one. And I said, Acha, fir main sunati hu. And then I would start telling them a story. And it is to their credit that they never poo-pooed me. They never told me to get lost, go away, do my own thing. They listened patiently. And I think this listening patiently, because I experienced so much of this in my childhood, all through my childhood, all up to my adulthood, I think that laid a very sound foundation for telling stories and interacting with children. So listening to children, telling them stories, creating stories with them.
And telling stories to children came naturally to you, as in that was because your childhood was so secure. That was
Yes.
the first thing that you started with.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one big hurdle which adults find in telling stories is they have this fear of looking foolish. So I always used to tell them in my workshop, I said, Dekho, wolf se daro, FOLF se nahi. And then they would say words and big definitions. And I said, no, it's just fear of looking foolish. And foolish is good, and silly is good. I mean, don't be scared to look foolish. Be foolish, be a little silly, and the child will welcome you. You know, they will feel that you're one of them. Because you can't tell a story, you can't sort of. And then a lot of times, you know, when I do workshops for teachers, they ask me, where can I find stories? And that is something that really pains me because, one, I mean, with the internet, that kind of a question should not be there at all for anyone. And secondly, I said, you live in a land of stories. I mean, I feel there are so many stories to be told that this one lifetime is not enough. I have to tell so many different kinds of stories. And you can't find a story to tell a child. The other thing that I think adults also stumble upon is that storytelling has become, I mean, you know, our grandmothers, our aunts, our uncles, teachers, they told stories. I mean, it was like breathing or walking or laughing. Telling a story was, you know, as common as that. But now storytelling has become a big thing. It's like a specialized skill. So I start by telling them, I said, I can't teach you storytelling. And they look very shocked because that's what they have paid me for and that's what they have invited me for. And I said, I can't teach you something you already are. It's not even that you know it. You are a storyteller. And then I gently point out to them that, you know, through the day they tell so many stories. I got late for class, or I did this, or I did that. All the conversations we have are like tiny, tiny stories all through the day. So yeah, I have gone off track somewhere.
No, you haven't. You
That's
haven't.
something
In
I
fact,
often do.
I'm sort of again taking up lots of interesting things, you know. So yesterday I was in the elevator with a family. There was a gentleman who had a baby who was perhaps a year, nose guy. They said, you know what? They will not want to see strangers. Because the moment you step out in front of a stranger, you suddenly say, do this, do that. They become, you know, I didn't say use the word, you make them feel like monkeys. They're playing a trick. I think they will have this anxiety of meeting strangers because suddenly parents want them to show off everything that you can, or you should be, you learned at home, a trick, or a skill, you know, as a nice little greeting or something. I go back to that thing that you said about you walking up to an adult and asking the adult for a story. You know, on the other hand, we don't allow children to do that with adults, whether their own or with strangers. And suddenly you make them feel like they have to show, we have to showcase what a child has learned. Okay, come on, tell a poem or recite a poem, do that dance, do this. And we've seen that, you know, the moment relatives come, suddenly the children are made to stand and do something, you know, all kinds of show act. But that freedom of a child to come to an adult and then say, let me tell you a story, and that adult being ready to entertain that child or having an honest conversation with that child. Is this because times have changed? Is this because people look at again storytelling as a specialized skill, or the patience has withered, or we look at children as something, oh, they have to be handled in a certain way, and it's not for me, or it takes time. What is that shift?
I think there would be a lot of strands going into it.
Mm.
Primarily, they're all leading to adults being quite muddled as of now. So, for one, with all the social media, there is always this thing about comparing,
Mm-hmm.
how your child is doing and how the other child is doing and what children are doing and what the best behaved children are doing and what. So that didn't exist when I was a child. So this is the part of the adult being muddled, and because he's muddled, he cannot quieten the noise in his own mind enough to listen to a child, to pay attention to a child. And I think it's one of the most calming experiences to be led by a child while he's telling a story. Because sometimes when adults also tell children to, when they say, okay, tell me a story and I'm ready, their mind keeps jumping and they want to keep correcting the child. They want to keep pointing out something which they think is the smarter thing to do. But what they're doing constantly is doing something and not being. So I would say all adults in a child's company need to focus on your own being, be a listener, be a patient person, and be open to possibilities. I mean, children have such amazing imaginations. If you just give them the space and give them the attention, they will weave such amazing stories. But adults are not allowing them. Also, what has happened, because these adults nowadays, I think a lot of people who are younger than me but still adults have not grown up on a diet of stories.
Yeah.
They are not
There's a
readers,
huge
they are not
difference.
listeners.
There's a huge difference. I mean, I know that, when, if you've not been raised with stories, then you become a different kind of an adult, and
Exactly.
it's difficult.
And you don't know. I mean, stories also help you structure your own learning in a very gradual, organic way as you grow older. But if you've not had that diet of stories, there's this big gap, and you are grasping at straws and trying to sort of acquire all these outside labels to prove that you are smart, you know what you're doing, you are well, or whatever. I mean, so you're constantly competing. So there's no room for stories. And the tragedy is that the children are the ones who really suffer because they don't know what they're entitled to and they don't know what they're being deprived of. So it has a profound effect on their childhood. Like I love to tell people, I said, please, childhood in Hindi is bachpan. So bachpan is 2 syllables, bach and pan, which the child already has. And a vibrant imagination is one of them. A healthy self-respect is one of them. But by treating them like performing monkeys, like you just pointed out, we are just ruining those most vital, fundamentally important things in a child.
This is one of the reasons why I love speaking with you, because there's so many things which are you you talk about, and especially about looking at children and their space. And I remember us talking about you being a childist. So we'll come to that shortly in the next answer. But the fact that we need to have conversations about how we are coexisting with children, whether our own or by somebody else's. People like you and me, we walk into spaces, or people invite us into spaces which are children's spaces, and they invite us to tell stories. So you can walk in as the adult that you are in the world, which could be muddled, like you mentioned, or you can walk in with as another adult who is willing to be a child at that point of time, not taking oneself seriously, or the fear of looking foolish is not there in your head. And therefore you can be another version of yourself which cannot exist in the adult world, because the adult world will not accept you with all your foolishness, but your child will. And a child, and that's one of my theories, that a lot of women come to me to learn storytelling, and a lot of women post a certain age they come, and that's because they're all seeking that sense of acceptance, that I can be my 100% in front of a child. Sometimes it interferes with their sense of being, and therefore the adult who has been given a responsibility of handling a child in that 1 hour or 30 minutes or whatever. So then they feel that pressure of it. But a lot of times, a lot of people come because that's the only space where they get, undivided attention from a child who's willing to listen to you and enjoy, and will give you so much of love, maybe a hug at the end of it, because you've given them delight. But they are seeking that. So I see adults who become a different version of themselves in front of a child. I've experienced it several times myself. That if I'm not truthful in front of a child, I feel uncomfortable. If I am not my most honest, vulnerable, bravest in front of them, and I feel that discomfort within. So my question to you is, despite everything that you just explained, what is it being a childist? So when you're walking into a child space as a parent, as an educator, as a storyteller, as a caregiver, you believe that lead with the child, let the child take precedence in that relationship. Now, what is that philosophy?
So, very simply, it's just dropping all these clothes. Drop the cloak of who you are, how old you are, how wise you are, how foolish you are. Drop the cloak of being an educationist or a storyteller or anything, and just be in the moment. And I think it's a very Zen like thing to do. And I think for that reason, now that I'm talking to you, it's occurring to me that anybody who has a child in their environment must read Zen stories. Even if they've not read any storybooks so far, they should read some Zen stories to get a sense of how you must be. Because if you're walking in, so one of my favorite words is possibilities, you know. So when you're walking in, there is this whole range of possibilities. And all you have to do is throw off your blinkers. Because the minute you have your blinkers on, you are already coming with a very restricted kind of a presence. Just throw it all off. And you mentioned vulnerability. I think vulnerability is such a strength. And you have to throw off all these things and be vulnerable, be open to the moment. I mean, the universe has got all these amazing things for you, and you have to be open to it. And a child senses that. A child senses what you have walked in with. So walk in with that, and then let the child decide. Tell him a story, tell her a story if that's what you want to do. Listen to, but you must also listen and incorporate whatever the child is saying, because you haven't just come to tell a story. Your fundamental reason is to communicate with the child. And for a child, for children, their language is play, their language is stories, their language is. So you can get to know a lot about what's going on in a child's mind by telling him a story or listening to a story or listening to his responses to a story you're telling. I'm reminded of this child who used to come to me quite regularly, and fabulous imagination and very lovely child. And all we did was we sat and created stories. He would get a bunch of animals, and we would be, there'd be all kinds of things happening. And all I had to do, and this is a part that's important, all I had to do is, he was the one creating the story. He was the one creating conflicts and fights and so. This dinosaur is winning and this is happening. All I had to do was give him the right response. So if a deer broke a leg, obviously I felt sad. And if a dinosaur suddenly jumped upon somebody, I felt scared. And all this, he would, sort of look at me with the corner of his eye and then keep building his story. So all this, just these responses without my saying things, added to his story, the drama in his story, and sort of made his imagination more vivid. So
I love this philosophy of being a giver. This is something my husband believes very strongly about, that if you are a giver, then you will learn to give. Giving will be part of your philosophy, your life, your values. So, as a storyteller, you have to be a giver. If you're stepping in front of the child and you are there because that child is giving you attention, therefore you become a taker. In the sense of validation that you get, so is that you're taking validation from the fact that there are so many children who are clapping the moment you start telling a story or you invent a great story. But if you become a giver, which is a giver of the gift of stories, the gift of attention, that to that one child, you made that one child feel so important in that moment that she's telling that story only to me, and that's so precious, because even in a sea of 100 children or 150 children, a child knows that whether the storyteller is going to look me in the eye and say something, but the moment you do, that child feels special, that. So you are a giver there, and giving, allowing that child this freedom to sort of play with a story, tell a nonsense story, doesn't matter, without correcting, without controlling his or her narrative, without saying, oh, this is very bad, you should not say such things, or this is not how it happened, let me tell you how it happens. You're taking over the thing, but you're allowing that person, the child, to tell a story. You are also giving, therefore, again, you're still giving. You're giving that child the space and the freedom to live and enjoy the story that he or she is creating. A lot of times, as storytellers, we just want to take. Also, we don't give our attention, our the audience, that time and that freedom. give something to us, or take something from us, which is not for us to give at all, but we are there in that moment, just allowing it to happen. I think that's important as a storyteller. I say listening is very important.
Yeah. So, I'm just going to butt in about the taking and giving. So, a lot of times, uh, sometimes people want to tell stories which has uh, some learning in it, or some moral in it, or some value in it. But I tell the message, stories must fall. Like I said, how many of you have looked up at falling rain? Can you imagine yourself looking up at falling rain and just let it fall? And that is how stories must fall on a listener's mind for him or her to create whatever learning he or she wants to, because each of us have come to that point with our own separate journeys. And you don't know what your story, who's taking away what from your story, and what is ringing a bell in whose mind, I mean, which part of your story. So just allowing the experience to happen and then just letting it be. It's like a good souffle or a good, you can't handle it too much. You just
And you shouldn't.
leave it, and yeah. So I think a lot of times adults also get caught up in this trap, especially adults who have not read books, that a story has to be a means of teaching a child, which is not true really at all.
I agree with that. Let the story do its job.
Yeah.
You don't interfere with it. You're just the medium of telling it. Let
Yes.
the
Yes.
audience, they are
And
intelligent enough.
while on the medium, I must have to say this. So I had attended Gita classes for a very long time, and this is our teacher who was a professor of English in Delhi University. So one of the things she said, and which has stuck with me, is that she said, "Be like Krishna's flute," because the minute the flute thinks that I am the one making the music, the flute gets filled with ego, and then it's not hollow enough to play the beautiful music. So you have to stay hollow for the music to play through you. And I think so it is with stories.
What a beautiful nugget of a wisdom and an analogy. I think it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and that's so true. That we are just the medium. Somebody else will tell that story, same story, but may stir something else in the audience, and in your hands, it will do something else in the hands
And it's
of the
just,
listener.
at this minute, it's flowing through you,
Yeah,
through all
that's
these people sitting before you.
right. The Storied Way perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag podcasting network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstorybag.com. So I miss telling stories along with you, Valentina. I think that's what is suddenly I'm having this bodily reaction that, oh my God, it's such a joy to tell stories alongside you, in front of the same audience. And I think I'm suddenly having big FOMO for that.
Yeah, and in some time maybe we should do the Dastan Goopy Bagha together.
Oh my God, I would love to. I would love to. I was going to come to that exactly. So I'm a big fan of Satyajit Ray, and I think I love his writing as much as his cinema and his filmography about that legend. And I remember you telling us that you are doing Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne. Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne filled up my childhood because every summer I would watch the films and back to back, and I would sing the songs, and that was my whole cultural immersion in let's say Bengali cinema as a child. Every summer I would watch it, and when you brought it, and I thought like, oh my God, that's a tough thing. I mean, the story is very simple, but the songs, the music, the metric, all of it is so tough to translate. Even I can't do it, even though I understand the language. I cannot do it in Hindi or even English. But you did it. the song, the meter, the rhythm, the words, the feeling of listening to that story. Tell us the process of doing Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne as a Dastangoi performance. First and foremost, why Dastangoi as a format? Because we'll talk about, maybe you can answer that here too. How did you get into Dastangoi, and how did you sort of adapt this story with the songs and the melody into a children's performance?
So yeah, Dastangoi first. So I had been doing storytelling sessions for children in schools and literature festivals and all. And then Fauzia was already doing Dastangoi, and she said, "I want to do it with you because it would be great to have two women Dastangois." I said, "Really?" And I had watched some Dastangoi performances, and I never thought that I'd be able to speak Urdu at that level, let alone memorize it all. And so I hemmed and hawed and let it pass for some time, but she was persistent. And we did do that. So for me, see, as a storyteller for children, I used to jump around a lot. I mean, people would tell me, okay, would you need a mic? And would you like a chair? I said, no, why would I like a chair? And I don't want to stand. I want a collar mic, and I would be leaping around. I couldn't sit and tell a children's story. And here was this art form, Dastangoi, where you're supposed to sit down. And I said, oh my God, the lower half of my body is not going to be part of this telling. I don't know if I can do that. But when we did it, it was very different and a very interesting and exciting experience. Yes, Dastangoi. And see, Dastangoi is a performance form which actually is very simplistic, and it relies on only two things: the beauty of the language and the skill of the narrator. Nothing else. No extra music, sets, props, nothing at all. So I like that. I like the fact that it was so simplistic. And once I got into it, I was really having a good time. Then Mahmood Farooqi Saab was teaching us, and he's the one who revived Dastangoi. And at one point of time, he said, "How about doing some Dastan for children?" So we were looking around, and I remember there was this book by Gulzar, which was Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne. And we picked it up, and Fauzia and I were going through it, and we were trying to rehearse from it. And my husband Anand walked in on us. So he came back from work, and we were rehearsing in the living room. And he walked in, he said, "This is all sounding so boring." And we said, "Yeah, isn't it?" And each of us was not finding it exciting enough. But when he said it, it was decided. He said, "Why don't you write it?" So then I said, okay. Then I watched the movie, which of course I had watched earlier. And then it all fell into place, and I had such a blast translating the songs. And then rehearsing. And then, of course, I mean, Ray's magic was there, and it was fabulous. But then, just before my first performance of Dastan Goopy Bagha, I got a little nervous because I said, I know what Bengalis are like. They'll come pointing a finger and say, "You meddled with our Ray." And I said, oh God, what am I going to say? But it was so lovely because after every performance I've had, at least one Bengali person come up to me and said it was like watching the movie all over again. And I was so grateful for that.
It is. It was. And I remember being completely in awe. I said, I don't think anyone could have touched Ray and could have done full justice to that performance, to the content, let's say the text, the song, everything, the feeling of having consumed the movie. And now listening to it, it was delightful. I think it was something I have not seen anyone else sort of retell a story and bring its magic. Again, you're somebody who sort of also picks up stories and translates them and tells them in their own words. Aao Suno Kahani is that. And again, there is magic in that. That's again, so Aao Suno Kahani is a collaboration between another storyteller, common storyteller friend of ours, Vasundhara Bahugana, and Valentina. And I hope to perhaps bring the two of you together just to talk about your process one day on the podcast. But till then, and I know for a fact it's that shared love for a story which is read in another language, translating it into Hindi and also narrating it in your own way, and again doing tandem. I mean, fantastic format and a fantastic recreation of a story. So, how did that happen?
And we told that is now a collection of over 100 short stories, world-renowned short stories, written by authors, 60 plus authors. So some were, of course, in Hindi, and we told them as they were. And those that were not in Hindi, there was Somerset Maugham and O. Henry and Mark Twain and George Orwell, everything we translated and told. So it's a collection of some of the world's best short stories told in Hindi. So that's how it happened. It was great fun. And Vasundhara has a full-time job. He's an engineer, works with TCS. So she would sometimes come for the recording to my house on her way to office, and I would quickly record it. And so it was a very interesting process. I wish we had done a making of Aao Suno Kahani, because it would have had all these interesting elements like the neighbor's dogs starting to bark just as we were recording, or somebody, doing jharu under the flat just as we were recording, or the connection being so slow and we were so committed to upload a story every Friday. But we went through it all.
So now I'm going to put now in connection with all the the two stories that you just shared about Goopy Gyne Bagha Byne and rewriting classics. So as a storyteller, you had a certain upbringing. I mean, okay, you became a storyteller later. As a person, you had a certain kind of upbringing, a love for stories, a love for books, a curiosity, and a generous intent to share stories. So that's one of the skills I think which are very important in a storyteller, which are good to have. It may not be there in everyone, but it's a very good to have if you have been raised like that. You have some of the things that help you in your journey. That's number one. Number two is, of course, the gift of the language. You mentioned that you were not, you had butterflies before you decided how should I get into Dastangoi or not, because of the chist Urdu. So there has to be a flair for language, whether it's Hindustani or it's English to that matter, or the willingness to sort of learn Urdu, memorize. Again, that's another thing which I cannot do for the love of stories. I cannot memorize stories. So it's going to be very tough for me. But having said that, that's another thing, a flair for language, or the ability to take chances and say, okay, I'm going to now learn how to get my diction right for chaste Urdu or Hindustani, a dialect, or maybe a bhasha, which the words don't come to me as naturally. So that's another. The third is ability to read, translate, and then write. That's a writing is another skill that I think is important. So from growing up with stories to having the willingness to use your a certain language mastery to be able to write. How did all these dots connect with you in your journey? Because I see you've done, and they are important skills to have, so that you can choose which form of storytelling do you want to do and how you want to take that ahead. I know now you're writing for children also. So there are certain steps, or let's say dots in your life, which you connect or you build those skills through practice, through performance, through riyaz, and that's how you have crafted your career around in storytelling. So what are the skills that have helped you? And if for anybody who's stepping into the field, whether they have these skills at all or not, what can they do to develop?
Thank you for asking that question, Rituparna, because the storyteller in me is now allowed to go back in time, flashback to my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, and he was a very well-known lawyer, and he taught himself to read and write Bangla, and he even translated some of Sharad Babu's stories. And he built a big koti. He was a lawyer in Lakhimpur Kheri, and he built a big koti. And naam unhone rakha Tara Nikunj, because Tara was my dadi's name. And the Tara Nikunj on the nameplate was written in Bangla. Briefly, he was invited by his ex-professor to come and teach English literature at the University of Srinagar. And while he was teaching there, where he taught Wordsworth's poetry, he would take his class on a shikara in the Dal Lake. So this romance and this love for
Ambience.
languages and this great excitement about the beauty of a language. I think I have it in my genetic makeup somewhere. My father also studied a bit of German, a bit of Russian, and some Bangla. So there was this whole. I think I grew up with a whole love for language, basically. And I still say that I feel sad that even though I'm an Indian, I only know two languages. I should have known at least one more. But my Bengali friends or my Gujarati friends didn't help me to learn their language, so I asked them to. So, yeah, talking about translation, because Hindi and English I've read both, equally since I was a child. So, translation for Aao Suno Kahani was, sort of, I didn't think much of doing it. But I must tell you that translating is a whole different experience. It was almost some stories which I translated. I remember one which was Two Friends by Mark Twain. And there was another one, Stranger in the Night, not by mom. Okay. And while translating these stories, it was almost as if I was in the mind of the writer. So you translate the words, and then somehow you can also read between the words. And it just opens up like a scene in your mind. It is a very meditative experience. So I found it to be really, really satisfying to translate stories. Uh, so for people who are looking to tell stories, the first thing is to read stories. So there is no shortcut to that. If you don't enjoy reading stories, you will never be a really good storyteller. You will tell stories. You will probably have a, bunch of 5, 10 stories that you memorize or you prepare or whatever. But the magic of stories will only come through you if you're a reader of stories, if you really love stories. And you can start reading stories at any age. And now you can listen to stories. So you are reluctant to read, listen. And there are podcasts and there are audio stories. So that is definitely, in my mind, fundamental way to telling stories. And then, of course, each story you could be telling the same story multiple times, but each telling is different. And you have to allow it to go through you. So sometimes in my workshops or teachers, it starts by saying, oh, we can't tell it as well as you do. And then I said, okay, park that thought, we'll come back to it. And then I get them to create stories. And when they tell those stories, they are not shy at all. They have created great stories. They put in songs and they tell it. And then when I asked them, did you hesitate? Did you feel shy? Did you wonder what the effect would be? And they said, no, none of that. And I said, that's because that story became your own. So, yeah, selecting. So there is a very nice piece by Shashi Tharoor. I plead that you read.
Yeah.
And reading cannot be emphasized enough. And I wish children and adults would make some time for reading stories.
What influences what you mentioned something about? First and foremost, I love the way you took a sort of very nice flashback, and you sort of said that storytelling is in your genetics. I believe too. I have got it from my father for sure. I have too. Yes, yes. So I know for a fact that what it means to be able to feel that, yeah, there's something inside running through your body. You're thinking different, you're feeling different, you're looking at it, everything very different. So it's genetic. That's number one. Number two is, I love the way that you sort of went back and connected the many dots in your life, and through how stories have influenced you for the language and things like that. You also some time back mentioned that now that at a certain age you look at how stories have shaped your being, from a professional to a storyteller to a performer to a writer, translator, to being a parent. Now you have a grown up child. You don't have to parent that child as much as you parent a young, one would parent young children, but you are working with educators, with parents. You're creating spaces where children come in and spend time with you. How has stories shaped your being in at these years?
It's very interesting because, and this was again some 10 years ago, somebody invited me to give a talk and they said, please talk about your work. And that made me sit down and really think, what have I been doing all these years? And then I realized all the work that I have done is around stories, directing or writing or editing or translating or performing, and that made me realize the importance of story in my life and how it's so intertwined in my life that I cannot separate stories from my life. So, again, what is your question?
My question is, how you cannot separate stories from your life, that's a given. But how have stories shaped you to be Valentina Trivedi today over the years, and different impact it has had?
So, I think for that talk, I also made a slide right in the end because I also thought about what stories have given me. And some of those points I remember. One is, of course, the ability to uh, embrace something new, to not restrict myself in a frame that this is who I am, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. I'm able to embrace things more openly, new things more openly. So a little bit of fearlessness, a little bit of, how should I say, of course, all the, empathy and quality and the ability to listen. And there's a whole lot of things. So it has shaped, all of this has come through stories in my life. And you mentioned my son. Yeah, he's much older. And incidentally, he's a writer too. He writes on food and travel. But Before he was born, I started buying books, storybooks for him before he was born. So he's also grown up on a diet of stories. And in our house here, we have a room full of books. It's a home library. And he says, when I come here, Mom, I feel very happy that in this library, I still find books that I haven't read and which excite me and which I want to read. So there is this, and I think, stories make you, one, know yourself better. So you are not measuring yourself against outside people or parameters or something. You know yourself, you know your strength, you know your weaknesses better, and you are better able to accept who you are, because uh, because you're not striving for something that you're not, and you're not pushing yourself, and you're not, I don't even know how to really put it into words, but you understand yourself better, you understand yourself deeper, and you are also able to separate the important from the not so important, because stories kind of put you in a place which is a very comfortable place, and they tell you everything is fine, you know don't keep jumping around. I mean, it's a very how should I say, it's very difficult for me to really put into words what stories have done for me.
Ask you a
But I
different
think
question.
all the things that probably people will talk about as my eulogy will all have to do with stories, somehow or the other. If they have something good to say about me, it'll be thanks to stories.
How do you see your career? Are you happy with your career? You're writing down, you were sort of videos. We spoke about the discipline of sitting down and writing.
Oh my God. I'm still seeking that discipline, but I want to tell more and more stories because I'm very excited by folk tales. And I also have a podcast on Puranic tales, which are so fascinating. But there's so many tales to tell. So, yes, I sometimes feel like the March Hare in Alice in Wonderland, who's rushing, 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 and I have to have so many stories to tell, and time is going by, and I have stories to tell. Yeah, and beyond that, things connected to stories keep coming up. So I feel like a squirrel darting on branches where I can see this whole huge tree of stories, and I have to tell stories, and I have to get people interested in stories, and I have to find kids to come and read the storybooks I have at home, and I have to write, and I have to translate. And so, yeah, so there is, if you, your question was, what do I think of my career? I don't really have a path chalked out, but yes, I am writing, and I want to be more disciplined in my writing. There also, what happens is I started writing a book, which is there are lots of stories, of course, which are in various stages of development. But this book is about 32,000 words already written. But I find that because I've uh, been connected with stories all my life, this book, the content of the book also rises from the whole orchestra of my mind. It started off as a parenting guide kind of thing, but it's encompassing everything now. So it's like a Medusa who's, just growing. So I have to snip it or make, more than one book out of it. But yeah, so that's where it is. And I really can't see a career beyond stories. I mean, I know whatever I do will have to be around stories one way or the other.
I totally believe it. I think that's why, again, I love you is because I see other people. I see you like me, a little ahead in the journey, exactly the way I can't sleep. Stories keep me awake. Stories put babies to sleep, children to sleep. Sometimes people binge watch just to fall asleep after that. Sometimes we consume social media stories just so that we can escape from our story and get into somebody else's and not think too much. But stories keep me awake. If there's a story in my head, I need to work around it and find a way to tell it. When I work with children, I tell them that there's a monster inside me, which is an insatiable hunger for stories. It has to read, it has to listen, it has to consume stories of every day. I have to feed it stories, otherwise it's going to give me a stomachache. And then
Glad this made sense to you because
hope, that I want to keep. It feels, you feel a push from within you that you can't keep it for yourself. You have to share it out, because everybody deserves to enjoy this. Everybody, this whole gift that you're talking about, of this privilege of having to tell stories to children, it's not because, oh, you're doing them a favor by telling them. No, you're doing yourself a favor by
Yes, yes.
telling them. But even I don't have words to explain it. But like talking to you, I feel that, okay, there is this. I know there are people who think alike, and you are one of them, which is that you have to keep sharing stories. And I love it that you find outlets for it. You find outlets to read, you find outlets to translate, you find an outlet to create a channel, a podcast. You also have a Puranic podcast. Tell us a little about that. So you find a way to share that gift of stories with people, not because you're getting something out of it all the time, but because you are giving people what is there inside you. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at storytelling. Tell us about your podcast of Puranic
Yeah.
stories.
So I would just like to add quickly that the joy you mentioned is the driving factor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The joy and the love for stories and this excitement about sharing because the stories are so wonderful, they have to be shared. So, yeah. The Puranic stories started some time ago during COVID years. And then I discontinued for some reason because there was one part I came to and I was finding it difficult to sort of put it in story form. So I let it be. I restarted some time back, just by, I think, about 3-4 months back, and it's picked up very well. The thing about the Puranic stories is it's from the Devi Puran. I want to specially spread these stories because the only stories that one hears about is the story of Ram or the story of Krishna. And there are all these other stories which have the same elements as a Harry Potter story. There is magic, there is jealousy, there is wars and battles and all kinds of love and all kinds of things. So these stories have to be told. Now, the interesting thing is that I realized that I could read Sanskrit quite well. And that was also, as a continuation of the language thing. I wondered why, because I hadn't learned Sanskrit. And then I realized that my father used to always recite shlokas aloud. And just hearing, that's the importance of hearing. You have a good oral environment as a child. All this that falls into your ears really makes a difference. So I got the intonation of Sanskrit. So that's why. So I enjoy reading the Sanskrit shloks also intermittently in the Puranic tales. It's a podcast in English, but I have Sanskrit shloks in between, few of them. And I realized that in my last episode, I had 5 of them. And my husband said, look, people want to listen to the story. And here you are again, taking a break and going into a Sanskrit shlok and reciting it. I said, yeah, because I love it so much. But then I realized that I have to curb myself and I have to tell this story. The other podcast that I'm doing these days is stories in Hindi written by an aunt of mine who's turning 98 in another
Wow.
week. Yeah. So Munshi Premchand was related to her. Lady has written stories. She wrote these stories 40 years ago, but they are still quite amazing. So I'm telling those stories. And I have every Sunday there's a new episode. And she calls me after listening to the story and she says, "मैं बहुत मजा आया ये कहानी बहुत अच्छी लगी मुझे लगा ये मैंने लिखी है क्या?" And she laughs and she blesses me.
Yes. And you're keeping her stories alive. And you're sharing that gift with the world. I didn't know about this podcast, and you must share it with me. And I'm going to share it with everybody who's listening to this podcast who listens to
Okay.
your stories.
Okay.
So one of the things which I started doing also with Valentina is that I love the digital format. And I keep telling people that you can always use the digital means to tell stories, because if you, whether it's a podcast, and I've trained, done a boot camp with storytellers, it's a fantastic medium to tell stories. So one little last question about audio, and what do you think of it as a medium and a platform for storytelling?
So you mean what do I think of?
What do you think of audio? Yeah,
Oh
podcast.
yeah. Oh, I think it is the need of the hour. It is a fantastic thing that audio stories have picked up because again they get back to listening, cultivating the skill to listen, and I think it's fabulous because it takes you away from the screen, and there is nobody else telling you stories, but you have podcasts and audio stories. So I think it's fabulous. I think everybody should find podcasts or audio stories that they like, and they must listen to them regularly. I've had some great feedback from people who listen to my podcast, and it's just a very calming thing. And yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah. So, shameless plug. I have another podcast called Golpo Stories from Around the World, where we have folk tales and I tell them and I also tell you how you can use them in the classroom, in the living room, and in the boardroom. The same story, how it can travel to three different spaces and it can spark conversations. That too is in a break, but that's going to come back for another season. So, for everyone out there, if you're looking for stories, you have three of Valentina's podcasts and one of mine. All of it will be in the show notes. So, do go and listen to it. Valentina, I love this conversation with you. Thank you so much. It's been a long, long time. We sat down and we spoke about all things storytelling, and what a privilege and a joy to speak to you. Always, always.
Thank you so much, Rituparna. Thank you. It's really been great chatting with you about, and about my favorite topic to fellow
Yeah,
storyteller
yeah.
who gets excited with stories.
Right, right. Thank you so much. And to all my lovely listeners, we're taking a short break on the podcast and the season break so that I can work on the stories that I've gathered so far and I can find new stories to tell you, new speakers, new storytellers, new change makers. And until then, if you like this episode, go ahead and share it with your friends. Write to me, tell me about what did you like, what kind of guests would you like me to bring on to the next season, because stories should not stop. And I know even when we stop telling stories, stories will continue to shape the world. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Valentina. Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them what can stories do in the world today. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.